start, right? Shit, hey.
Good morning. After Ken Klingenstein inspired us to make mistakes because others would make bigger mistakes, or as Sony Corporation once had as a motto, we want to be the first ones to make mistakes. Let's start working. We all, national research and education networks, we all started 10, 12, 13 years ago. We started with wires, networks, communication, providing internet access to our users. Soon we realized this is not enough, and we soon realized that information services, that education, user support, pilot projects, and a range of things are necessary in order to enable users to use the technology to its full potential. As organizations, we also need to grow. As organizations, we also need to change and adopt, depending on the services we need to provide. How to do this, how to change, how to know what actually we need to do is actually the topic of this session. Our first speaker comes from Belgium. Mr. Guy Mollet is, I'm privileged to say, many years friend of Carnet, our consultant, our coach, and the person behind the processes of change within Carnet as an organization in our attempt to accommodate to everything we need to do. Mr. Mollet has a master's degree in civil engineering and architecture from Rijksuniversiteit in Ghent, and he worked there for 2 years as assistant professor. Since 1978, he was with Volkswagen Group, and in 1995, he headed a new department responsible for human resource research and benchmarking. In plain words, he was in charge of educating top managers in Volkswagen. He's retired from Volkswagen and runs his own consulting company right now. As Hewlett-Packard in one of their research studies said, if Hewlett-Packard knew what Hewlett-Packard knows, we would be 3 times as effective. They were talking about knowledge management. Mr. Mollet will talk about knowledge management.
Thank you, Predrag. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Many years ago, we were all born. And if you remember that particular time, the first 5 years of our lives was a fascinating period in terms of knowledge transfer, because it was open, you know. You could get all the information and knowledge you wanted both ways. It was a fascinating period. Unfortunately, as Bernard Shaw said, at a very young age, I had to interrupt my education to go to school. And for the next 20 years or so, we were in a totally different ballpark. We were in a knowledge transfer situation where it was the teacher and you. A knowledge transfer to your colleague, friends, was not called knowledge transfer, it was called cheating. Now, after 20 years of this brainwashing, we came out of the schools, and I'll show you my first chart, like this, right? We were egoistical maniacs. Oh, I'm sorry, forgot the most important thing here. Me, right? It was me and the others. And then, after these 20 years, we all started to work. Most of us started to work for someone else. And when today you get in a new organization, you have your new boss or the guy in charge of human resources. My friend Guy, you have joined TERENA. This is a fantastic organization. And the specific thing of our organization is teamwork. Here, you know, we share knowledge, we work in teams, and you are scared. You are scared shitless because, I mean, for the last 20 years, you've learned something totally different, and all of a sudden, they tell you, hey, this is one team. You never learned how to do that. Fortunately, very rapidly, they realized that this is one big lie, because if you want to have the company car and the perks that you see your colleagues have, there's one thing you need to know, which is that if you have knowledge, keep it for yourself, because this is what will bring you up the ladders of your organization, right? So you're back in familiar terrain and you say, hey, this I know how to handle. I'm telling you this because I want to illustrate that transferring knowledge is not exactly something we are trained to do. It's not exactly something the environment we are living is conducive to give us as an inclination. Now I want to tell you a story. Many years ago, as Predrag said, I was in charge of the education, management development of senior executives at the Volkswagen organization. And one of the things we did was to bring the 150 or so senior executives of that group together in one spot to try to have these guys learning and knowing each other. And I remember it was in June, about 6-7 years ago. We were in Saint-Paul-de-Vence in the south of France. We were working together with Theseus, which is in Sofia Antipolis, a business school. And we were in Saint-Paul-de-Vence, and it was June, and we were overlooking the sea, Mediterranean Sea in the back, and we were sipping a glass of wine. Imagine a fantastic atmosphere. And I was sitting there with two of my colleagues. One was in charge of a manufacturing plant in Brussels, huge plant, 6,000 people, 1,000 cars a day. And the other guy was in charge of a plant in Mladá Boleslav in Czech Republic, same size. These guys were talking, we were talking obviously about ourselves. And all of a sudden, these guys realized that at the same time, they were engaged in a process of building a huge, very sophisticated, computerized warehouse without knowing it from each other. Different resources, different consultants, different suppliers. Let me tell you, let me ask you, isn't that stupid? Yes, totally stupid, right? Totally stupid. Now, obviously, after that, they worked together. Now, the reason why I'm telling you the second story, combined with the first one, is actually my next slide, which is, there is this knowledge paradox, knowledge management paradox. On the one hand, we've been trained, and we know that knowledge is power. On the other hand, we also know intellectually that, well, sharing knowledge is good for me and is good for the organization I'm working with. So how do you deal with that? Well, oh yes, this is this one. I have another question, a question to TERENA. How big do you think is the probability that today, out of the 28 plus 24 members that TERENA has, I looked it up in the web, that 2 of these NRENs are engaged in a similar project without knowing it from each other? First question. Second question, how high is the probability that one of these NRENs is engaged in a project without priorly having asked it at TERENA if someone else had done something similar in the past very successfully? How high is the probability that these 2 questions? The answer is yes. Well, I think the probability is very big. And this is why I thought that it might be wise to talk a little bit about knowledge management. Because for a decade now, big companies in the world have started thinking about how do we manage our knowledge better. And they have started, these companies, thinking about it and implementing systems. Because, first reason, my warehouse story. They didn't want to duplicate stories like that because it's stupid, it costs a lot of money. But there is a second reason why companies have started thinking and implementing knowledge management systems. And the reason is a money reason. Every year, every company, TERENA as well, is publishing an annual report. And in this annual report, you have somewhere a book value of the company. This is, what is this company worth in terms of buildings, computers, furniture, everything that's tangible and measurable is on that book value of the company. That's one piece of information, money. On the other hand, if the company is on the shareholder market, and if you multiply the value of the share today with the number of shares, you will have a second figure. And the second figure is much higher than the first one in most companies. I'm not talking about Anhold or Enron, I'm talking about companies that are working. And how big is it? How big is this difference? Well, in traditional companies such as mining or steel industries, car industries, it would be 2 to 3 times. In software, the Microsoft might be 100 or 1,000 times. Now, the point is that this difference between the book value and the shareholder value is called goodwill. But actually, what is it? It's the knowledge that exists in this organization. And the point is, who managed this whole huge amount of money? No one. Well, no one until a few years, what companies were saying, this is stupid. We should really be a little bit more attentive to this huge amount of asset that we have and that we don't manage properly because it's difficult and because it's difficult to measure. These are the 2 reasons why companies a few years ago started to look at knowledge management. Now, before I go further, I would like to tell you a few things about knowledge. I have here the yellow pages of Zagreb. If I open the yellow pages of Zagreb, I have here a phone number, and that is 276-678. No, that's a phone number. Phone number is a data. And when I look further, I see that this telephone number is from Emina, and they are selling cravats. Cravats, ties are big in Croatia, as everybody knows, and there is an address. And this is information. And the fact that I am looking for a new cravat, and that I found the yellow pages, and that I could locate this address and the phone number, that's knowledge. So, you have to make a distinction between data, information, and knowledge. First. Second, who among you cannot drive a car? You can all drive a car. You cannot drive a car. You won't understand my example, but that's okay. So, the example is, when we learned to drive a car, we had a teacher, an instructor, and this guy / girl taught us you have to sit and grab the steering wheel, and then the left pedal, when you push it, you can change the gears and all that, you know, and very sequentially you learned all that, very, very analytically. And after a while, you could indeed very explicitly drive the damn thing. But now, months or years later, when I step in my car, when you step in your car, you fire the engine and off you go. You don't think about it. So from explicit knowledge, it has become tacit knowledge. So knowledge can be explicit and knowledge can be tacit. That's the second thing we need to know about knowledge. Anybody plays an instrument, music instrument in this room? Which? Clarinet. Clarinet. When you play the clarinet, you hear a tune, you close your eyes, and you play the music. Fabulous. Oh, I'm envious. So what happens? This gentleman has the tacit knowledge of transferring a piece of music into, you know, the keys of his clarinet. He doesn't need to think. That's tacit knowledge, right? Another thing about knowledge is that where is knowledge? Well, we talked about knowledge is in the head, in the mind of the people. But it can be somewhere else as well. Carnet has, for instance, one of the things that they have done in the past. They have a very good process of training the trainers. Now, this process contains a lot of knowledge, how they do that. So knowledge is also somewhere ingrained in a process. Carnet, again, is organized as a project-driven organization, which means they have a lot of projects going on. And they have a very good piece of software that they use to manage these projects. Now, this piece of software is a product. There's a lot of knowledge in that product. So knowledge can be contained in a product. And lastly, all of you have markets, NRENs have markets. You don't call it markets, but they are your partners in education and whatever social context that you have. And this market, to know how to deal in these markets is also knowledge. So just to summarize, where is knowledge hidden? Well, let me see if it works. The next one. Yep, where is knowledge? Well, it's in people, it's in processes, it's in markets, and it is in products. The last thing I want to tell you about knowledge. Everybody has visited Zagreb last night or the night before? Well, if you have seen the cathedral. And you have seen the cathedral. I mean, cathedrals like this are all over Europe. And the guys who built these cathedrals, I'm sorry ladies, but at that time there were no girls building cathedrals. They were called cathedral builders. And they were fabulous persons because they were a combination of architects, engineers, artists, politicians. They were great persons, these cathedral builders. Now, how did they learn their trade? Well, when they were very young, they went to another cathedral builder and they carried his sandwiches, his hammer, and they grew with him and they absorbed all the knowledge that he had, I would say by osmosis. And when they were like 17 or something, they were called companions at that time, apprentices, companions, and they traveled all over Europe looking for other cathedral builders in Reims, Notre-Dame de Paris, Köln, and they learned further from these other cathedral builders. And eventually they became themselves cathedral builders. How did they learn? What was the knowledge transfer process? Well, it was osmosis, as I said. It was tacit knowledge transfer. When we learned to drive a car, in my example, that was explicit knowledge transfer. So, two types of transfer knowledge possibilities, tacit and explicit. And then the last thing, very quickly about knowledge, what I love most is when you give away knowledge, it grows, and I still keep it. Have you ever thought of that? You give it away, it grows, and you still keep it. What I'm telling you now, you will receive it from me, you will combine it with your own knowledge of the subject, it will grow. It's like love. Give it away, it grows. I think it's beautiful. So, let's go back to the companies. What do these companies do in order to manage their knowledge better? If you want to know more about that, there has been two very important benchmarking studies on the subject, conducted by an American association called APQC, American Productivity and Quality Center. They're based in Houston. They have a website called apqc.org. If you go in there, you'll find all about them. Now, in 1996, they conducted a benchmarking study in the United States. In 1998, they did the same thing in Europe. I participated in the second one. And they found about 20 companies who not only were organizing knowledge management systems in their organization, but were best in class in doing that. And what I want to show you quickly is that although every one of these companies is doing something different. Why? Because it's new, and second, because all these companies have different contingencies. I mean, the McKinseys of this world don't deal with knowledge the same as Volkswagen does. But they all have common denominators. And the common denominators are, let me see if this works, they all focus on identification, they all focus on transfer, and they all focus on use of knowledge. They all want to know what is the knowledge that we have and where is it? Where and how can we transfer it? And lastly, how do we use it? Because if you transfer it and you don't use it, it's useless. I mean, if I'm a shepherd and I live in an island, one of the 1,000 islands of Croatia, and there are no roads there and no cars, and I learn to drive a car, it's pretty useless. So knowledge is only useful if you really use it. And the second thing, all these companies focus on innovation and creation of new knowledge. No. How do they do that? Well, two things here. They all focus on personal responsibility and on volunteers. Why? Well, because as I said in the beginning, we are not spontaneously inclined to transfer knowledge, our knowledge. So it only works well. I cannot force you to transfer your knowledge to me. You only will do it if you think you need to do it. Next thing is, they all have, like TERENA would have, separated business units where they have something and it's coordinated centrally. This model is quite general. Teamwork works better than individual because we don't like to share. Most companies, if not all of them, have created some types of an award. Not necessarily money, can be a medal, can be recognition, anything that shows you, haha, yes, this knowledge transfer has happened, it's used, it's good, thank you, bravo, right? And same with TERENA here. There are geographic boundaries, there are language boundaries, cultural barriers, so they use heavily technology. And this is the right place to talk about this. They use heavily technology and they use heavily teams. Teams in terms of having persons from all over the business units working together on the same subject. Next is measurement. If you don't measure what you do, it won't happen. This is true for knowledge as well. And what these companies all have in common is they want to know not only where their knowledge is, but how big is it? How is it evolving? Is it worth something? Any indicators that they can think of, they use to see whether the knowledge they have is evolving in the right direction. So the use of measurement or indicators is very important. And lastly, support from senior management. I know that the previous speaker was saying it should come from bottom up. Yes, but because we are human beings and we like to look at the boss or at the pack leader, if the pack leader is not supporting knowledge transfer in any system, it won't work, believe me. So this is what companies have been doing. Now, let's go back to TERENA. Ooh, you have to rush. I looked as the chap from Siena yesterday night at the show to the statuses of TERENA. I also looked at the objectives of TERENA, and I found, and you can read the red bullets, the red lights, the red words. These are the statuses. These are the objectives. And when you read this, and more of that in the annual report, then I all of a sudden realized that TERENA is right dead in the knowledge management ballpark. And I tried to recapture all these statuses and objectives with my words in order for me to understand it better. And I devised a new mission statement for TERENA, which is, actually we can read it. I think they help. TERENA helps creating, transferring and sharing knowledge, a new field is education, IT and networks. I think that's what it is. And if that is what it is, then there is something quite particular with TERENA. IBM is building mainframes, Siemens is building handheld phones, Volkswagen is building cars, and they have a management tool which is called knowledge management. They manage their knowledge as a management tool. But TERENA's core business is knowledge management. It's the core of what this association is doing, is managing knowledge. So, my next question was, how do they do that? Well, I looked again in the maps, in the sites, and in the annual report, and it's fabulous, all the things that TERENA is doing. I just counted from today on until the end of the year, there are 52 events, like workshops, meetings, and conferences. So that's 2 for every week to come. So they do a hell of a lot of things. And still, I believe that they can improve. I believe that they can improve, and let me show you. I put down 6 questions. The first question is, which knowledge has TERENA? Is there a place in this association where I can go and look, what knowledge do you have? Is there a place where I can find where this knowledge is located? Is there somewhere a place where I can see how it is measured, how the evolution is measured? I looked into the annual report. Apart from the financial report, there's nowhere an indicator of whatever in terms of their knowledge. How do you create? Well, obviously, there's a lot of conferences during these 3 days that explain the creation of new knowledge. So yes, there is something there. And lastly, are there transfer mechanisms that are in place, enabling the NRENs that are in fact the users of the TERENA Association devices? Are they there for them to use in an easy way? Well, my next point is, I would, as a consultant, recommend TERENA to think about the following action. And it's quite simple. The philosophy is simple. The practical applications are not simple. The first thing to do, if you are a knowledge organization, is to make an inventory. Where is this knowledge that we have? And the second thing is, what are the mechanisms that we have to transfer it in an easy way that everybody understands and uses? And thirdly, how is it used and how do we measure it? And there's one measurement tool that I like very much. TERENA only exists because there are members who have created TERENA and they pay for it. So how satisfied are these members in terms of the efficiency of services, rapidity? How satisfied? We will have a questionnaire at the end of this conference asking us how happy we are about it. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about much more. I'm talking about, as a customer of this organization, year in, year out, how good are they responding to my needs? And if I were in charge of this organization, I would like to know that, because it will help me improve, right? And then you could imagine, and that's not my task, I mean the guys of TERENA and the members should imagine. You can imagine a lot of indicators helping you to see, okay, what are we doing, how are we doing? But you need indicators. Going quickly here. So I have 5 scenarios to suggest to TERENA. The first one is, well, do nothing. Because, you know, I'm a consultant, I'm not a priest. If you don't want to change, hey, don't change. But as a professional and an expert of these matters, I'd say, well, there is matter for improvement, right? And the one thing I could recommend is to have in every NREN a knowledge coordinator. I'm not talking about a new job. I'm talking about someone specifically in charge of saying, at CARNET, what's the knowledge that CARNET has created in the last 3 years? Right? Publish it. Put it on the web. Make it accessible. This exists at TERENA. There is a centralized knowledge coordinator. Not called like that, but there is something. But this function should be combined with the decentralized function. Once again, to help the users. And then, if you need specific needs, a specific project that you have in mind to develop, this is not the place. Because a conference like this is very important. And it's very rich. But it's still a random knowledge transfer platform. Because when you come here, you look at the program and say, yeah, maybe I find something interesting, maybe not. Maybe I find something applicable by me at home, maybe not. So it's totally random. It's in the mind of those who have conceived this conference by saying, well, we think that our members will probably like this and this and this. Right. But it's not structured and it's not focused. So if you want to focus, and Peter will talk about it, benchmarking would be the answer. And lastly, if you want to invest heavily, and that's a matter of politics, I think it must be something to think about, to have a structured, professionally knowledge management structure. And it exists in the outside world. I'm almost done. 2 slides. It exists in the outside world. And there are many good companies in this world who have a decade of experience in these matters. This is a chart where I try to recapture the quality of knowledge transfer. If you only want to know why, broad picture, this is an ideal place. But if you want to learn something very specific, usable, I think a benchmarking study or a totally structured integrated knowledge management would do better. If you want to know who knows, well, knowledge coordinators and a centralized function certainly would help. And lastly, if you want to know who did it with a lot of success, benchmarking is certainly a good answer, coordinators and a centralized function as well. Let me wrap it up. I would like to wrap it up with 3 bullets. The first one is, knowledge management, ladies and gentlemen, is difficult. And it is difficult because we don't like to share our knowledge, as I explained. And second, because it's complex. Second, there are excellent models in the industries. Why not look at it? And lastly, because knowledge management is TERENA's core business, well, why not improve by learning from what has been in use in the industries for many years now? Voila. This is what I wanted to tell you. Thank you for your time. I'm ready to answer questions.
Thank you.